Sarah Mitchell wiped the coffee stains from her apron and looked at the big clock on the wall. It was 7 in the evening. Her shift at the small coffee shop was finally over. She had been working since 9 in the morning. Her feet hurt from standing all day. Her back ached from bending over to clean tables and wash dishes. The coffee shop was called Royal Brew, and it sat on a busy street near Buckingham Palace in London. Every day, hundreds of tourists walked past the windows. They took pictures of the palace guards and bought coffee and snacks. Sarah liked working there most days. The pay was good and her boss was kind. But today had been very busy and very long. Sarah untied her apron and hung it on a hook in the back room. She grabbed her small blue backpack from a locker. Inside the backpack were her phone, some money, her keys, and a book she was reading for school. Sarah was 19 years old and studied at London University. She wanted to become a teacher someday. Working at the coffee shop helped her pay for school. "See you tomorrow, Sarah," called out Mike, the other worker who would stay until closing time. Mike was older than Sarah and had worked at the shop for 3 years. He was always friendly and helped Sarah when she needed it. "Thanks, Mike. Have a good evening," Sarah called back. She pushed open the front door of the shop and stepped outside. The street was still busy even though it was evening. Cars moved slowly in both directions. People walked on the sidewalks carrying shopping bags and cameras. Street lights were starting to turn on as the sun got lower in the sky. The air was cool and fresh compared to the warm coffee shop. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the taxi app. She was too tired to take the bus home. The bus would take 40 minutes and she would have to stand the whole time. A taxi would get her home in 20 minutes and she could sit down and rest. While she waited for the app to load, Sarah looked around at the familiar street. She had worked at Royal Brew for 8 months now. She knew this area very well. Across the street was a small park where people sat on benches and fed birds. Next to the coffee shop was a souvenir store that sold postcards and toy soldiers dressed like palace guards. The most interesting thing about working here was watching the real palace guards. Every day, guards on horses rode up and down the street. The horses were big and beautiful. The guards wore red uniforms and tall black hats. Tourists loved to take pictures with them, but the guards always looked very serious and professional. Right now, Sarah could see one of the horse guards about 50 yards away. The guard sat very straight on a large black horse. The horse was calm and stood perfectly still while people walked around taking photos. Sarah had seen this same guard many times before. He looked young, maybe in his 20s. His uniform was perfectly clean and his boots were shiny. Sarah's phone buzzed. The taxi app showed that a driver had accepted her request. The taxi would arrive in 5 minutes. The driver's name was Ahmed, and he had good ratings from other passengers. Sarah put her phone back in her pocket and walked to the edge of the sidewalk to wait. The evening was getting cooler, and Sarah was glad she had brought her light jacket. She put it on and zipped it up. Around her, other people were also finishing their workday. She saw office workers in suits walking quickly toward the underground station. A group of tourists studied a map and pointed in different directions. Sarah thought about her evening plans. She needed to read 2 chapters for her education class tomorrow. She also wanted to call her mother, who lived in Manchester. Sarah missed her family, but loved living in London. The city was exciting and full of opportunities. Her dream was to finish university and get a job teaching children. A loud horn honked nearby. Sarah looked up and saw that traffic was getting heavier. Rush hour was starting and the streets were filling with cars and buses. She was glad she had called a taxi instead of trying to take the bus. The bus would be crowded and slow in this traffic. Sarah checked her phone again. 3 more minutes until the taxi arrived. She looked around and noticed that more people were gathering near the palace guard on the horse. A tour group with matching yellow hats was listening to their guide explain the history of the palace guards. Children pointed at the horse and asked their parents questions. The guard on the horse was named Trooper James Henderson, though Sarah did not know his name. James was 26 years old and had been a palace guard for 4 years. His horse was called Wellington, and they had worked together for 2 years. Wellington was a very smart horse who was trained to stay calm around crowds and loud noises. He was also trained to protect people if there was danger. James took his job very seriously. Every day he watched the streets carefully. He looked for anything unusual or dangerous. He helped lost tourists find their way. He made sure people stayed safe around his horse. James loved working with Wellington. The horse was like his partner and best friend. Right now, James was watching the evening crowd from his position on Wellington. He could see the busy coffee shop where Sarah worked. He could see the tourists taking pictures. He could see the cars and buses moving slowly in the traffic. Everything looked normal and peaceful. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Her taxi was 1 minute away. She looked down the street and saw a small blue car with taxi signs on top moving toward her through the traffic. She waved her hand so the driver would see her. The taxi pulled up to the curb right in front of Sarah. The driver rolled down his window and called out, "Sarah, going to Paddington?" "Yes, that's me," Sarah replied. She walked toward the taxi door, happy that she would soon be sitting down and heading home. Her tired feet would finally get a rest. She could close her eyes during the ride and relax after the long day at work. As Sarah reached for the taxi door handle, she did not notice that someone across the street had been watching her. A man in dark clothes had been standing near the souvenir shop for the past 10 minutes. He had been looking at Sarah while she waited for her taxi. Now he started walking quickly across the busy street toward her. The man's name was Mark Stevens. He was 32 years old and had been having problems with his life recently. He had lost his job 3 weeks ago. His girlfriend had left him. He was angry and confused and not thinking clearly. For some reason that he could not explain, he had decided to follow Sarah when he saw her leaving the coffee shop. Sarah put her hand on the taxi door handle, ready to get in and go home. The driver waited patiently while she opened the door. Traffic continued to move slowly around them. People walked by on the sidewalk. The palace guard on his horse continued to watch the street from his position nearby. None of them knew that. In the next few seconds, this quiet evening would suddenly become very dangerous and very frightening. Mark Stevens stepped onto the busy street without looking for cars. A red bus had to brake hard to avoid hitting him. The bus driver honked his horn loudly and shouted something out the window. Mark did not seem to care. He kept walking toward Sarah and the blue taxi. Sarah had just opened the taxi door when she heard the bus horn. She turned around to see what was happening. That was when she first saw Mark walking quickly toward her. Something about the way he moved made her feel uncomfortable. His eyes were fixed on her, and he looked angry. Sarah had never seen this man before in her life. "Is everything okay, miss?" asked Ahmed, the taxi driver. He had also noticed the man walking toward them. Ahmed had been driving taxis in London for 10 years. He had learned to spot trouble before it started. Something about this situation did not feel right. Sarah looked at Mark again. He was now only 20 feet away and still walking straight toward her. His hands were in fists, and his face looked mean. Sarah felt scared, but she was not sure why. Maybe the man just wanted to cross the street. Maybe he was looking at something behind her. Maybe she was worrying about nothing. "I think so," Sarah told Ahmed, but her voice sounded uncertain. She started to get into the taxi, hoping the man would just walk past them and leave her alone. Mark was now 10 feet away. Sarah could see his face clearly. His eyes were bloodshot and his hair was messy. His clothes looked like he had been wearing them for several days. When he opened his mouth to speak, Sarah could smell alcohol on his breath. "Hey, hey you!" Mark called out to Sarah. His voice was loud and slurred. Several people on the sidewalk turned to look at them. "I've been watching you. I need to talk to you." Sarah felt her heart start beating faster. She did not know this man, and she did not want to talk to him. She quickly got into the taxi and tried to close the door behind her. But Mark was too fast. He reached the taxi just as Sarah was pulling the door closed. He grabbed the door handle and pulled it back open. His other hand reached inside and grabbed Sarah's arm. "Don't leave! I said I need to talk to you!" Mark shouted. His grip on Sarah's arm was tight and painful. She tried to pull away, but he was much stronger than her. "Let go of me!" Sarah cried out. "I don't know you! Leave me alone!" Ahmed, the taxi driver, did not know what to do. He could see that the man was hurting Sarah. He wanted to help her, but he was afraid to get out of the car. Mark was bigger than him and seemed dangerous. Ahmed reached for his phone to call the police. "Get in the car!" Mark yelled at Sarah. "Come with me, we need to talk." He started trying to pull her out of the taxi. Sarah held on to the car seat with her free hand and tried to stay inside. "Help! Someone help me!" Sarah screamed. Her voice was loud and scared. More people on the sidewalk stopped to look at what was happening. Some of them took out their phones to record or call for help. An older woman with gray hair started walking toward the taxi. "Leave that girl alone!" she shouted at Mark. "Let go of her right now!" Mark turned his head to look at the woman. "Mind your own business!" he yelled back. "This is between me and her!" He tightened his grip on Sarah's arm and pulled harder. Sarah felt tears starting in her eyes. Her arm hurt where Mark was squeezing it. She was scared and confused. Why was this stranger trying to take her somewhere? What did he want from her? She had never done anything to hurt him. A young man in a business suit also started walking toward them. "Hey, mate, let the girl go," he said to Mark. "You're scaring her. Stay back," Mark shouted. He looked around at all the people watching him. Instead of letting Sarah go, he seemed to get more angry and desperate. "Everyone stay back. This is none of your business." Ahmed finally got through to the emergency number on his phone. "Police, I need police," he said into the phone. "A man is attacking a passenger in my taxi. We're on Victoria Street near the Palace." Sarah could hear Ahmed talking to the police, but she was not sure they would arrive in time. Mark was still pulling on her arm and trying to drag her out of the taxi. She used her other hand to hit his arm and try to make him let go. "Stop fighting." "Me!" Mark yelled. "Just come with me. I just want to talk." But his actions did not match his words. He was being violent and frightening. Sarah knew that going anywhere with this man would be very dangerous. More people were gathering around the taxi now. A small crowd had formed on the sidewalk. Everyone was watching and some people were trying to help, but Mark seemed to get more upset as more people paid attention to him. "Everyone get away!" Mark screamed. "Leave us alone!" Spit flew from his mouth as he shouted. His face was red and the veins in his neck were showing. He looked like he might hurt someone badly. Sarah tried a different approach. She stopped fighting and looked directly at Mark. "Please," she said in a calm voice. "You're hurting me. Can you please let go of my arm?" For a moment, Mark seemed to hesitate. His grip loosened slightly. Sarah thought maybe she could reason with him and make him understand that he was scaring her. But then Mark's expression changed again. His eyes got angry, and he tightened his grip even more than before. "No!" he shouted. "You have to come with me! I've been planning this." Those words made Sarah feel even more scared. Planning what? How long had this man been watching her? What did he want to do to her? She realized that talking to him would not work. He was not thinking clearly, and he might be dangerous. Sarah started fighting again, trying to pull her arm free and stay in the taxi. She kicked at Mark with her feet, but could not reach him from inside the car. The taxi door was between them, but Mark was leaning inside and still holding her arm tightly. Ahmed was still talking to the police on his phone. "Please hurry," he said. "The man won't let go. The girl is crying. There are lots of people here, but no one can stop him." The crowd on the sidewalk was getting bigger. At least 20 people were watching now. Some were trying to help, and others were just curious about what was happening. A few people were recording everything with their phones. But none of them were big enough or brave enough to physically fight with Mark. He was tall and strong and seemed like he might be on drugs or alcohol. Everyone was afraid of getting hurt if they tried to grab him. Sarah looked around desperately for someone who could help her. That was when she saw the palace guard on his horse about 30 yards away. The guard was sitting up straight and looking directly at them. He seemed to understand that something bad was happening. The horse was big and powerful looking. The guard wore an official uniform and looked like someone who could handle dangerous situations. Sarah hoped he would come to help her. But 30 yards was far away, and Mark was getting more violent every second. Sarah did not know if help would arrive in time. She was trapped between Mark and the taxi seat with nowhere to go. Her arm was starting to go numb from his tight grip. "Please," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Mark or to God or to anyone who might be listening. "Please help me." Trooper James Henderson had been watching the street carefully all evening. It was part of his job to notice when something was wrong. From his position on Wellington, he could see far down the busy street. He had noticed the man crossing the road without looking. He had seen him walking toward the young woman at the taxi. Now he could see that the situation was becoming dangerous. James touched Wellington's neck gently with his hand. The horse immediately understood that his rider was alerting him to something important. Wellington's ears turned forward and his muscles became ready for action. The horse had been trained for situations exactly like this one. "Easy, boy," James whispered to Wellington. "We might need to help someone." Wellington snorted softly and took a small step forward. The horse could sense the tension in the air. He could hear the woman screaming for help and the man shouting angrily. James made a quick decision. He gently pressed his legs against Wellington's sides and the horse began moving toward the taxi. They did not run or gallop. That might scare the crowd of people and make the situation worse. Instead, they moved at a steady, controlled pace that would get them there quickly but safely. As they got closer, James could see more clearly what was happening. The man was gripping the young woman's arm and trying to pull her from the taxi. She was fighting back and crying for help. The taxi driver looked scared and was talking on his phone. People on the sidewalk were watching, but no one seemed able to stop the attack. Wellington could smell the fear and anger in the air. Horses have very good senses and can tell when humans are in danger. Wellington had been trained to protect people. He had practiced many times with James for situations like this. The horse knew exactly what to do. When they were 20 yards away, James called out in a loud, clear voice, "Police! Let the woman go immediately!" His voice was strong and authoritative. It was the voice of someone who was used to giving commands and having people obey them. Mark Stevens turned his head to look at the approaching horse and rider. For a moment, his grip on Sarah's arm loosened. He seemed surprised to see a uniformed guard riding toward him, but then his expression turned angry again. "Stay away!" Mark shouted at James. "This is none of your business. Leave us alone." He tightened his grip on Sarah's arm again and pulled harder. Sarah cried out in pain. James and Wellington were now 15 yards away. James could see that the man was not going to obey his command. The man seemed desperate and dangerous. James knew he had to act quickly before someone got seriously hurt. "Sir, I am ordering you to release the woman and step away from the vehicle," James called out again. His voice was calm but firm. "Release her now!" Mark looked at James with wild eyes. "No, she has to come with me. I've been planning this for weeks," he screamed. These words made James realize that this was not just a random incident. The man had been stalking this young woman. Wellington was now 10 yards away. The horse could see the man hurting the woman. Wellington's training took over. The horse knew that when humans were in danger, he was supposed to help stop the threat. Wellington's eyes focused on Mark Stevens. James gave Wellington a small signal with his hands. It was so subtle that most people would not have noticed it. But Wellington understood perfectly. The horse began moving faster and positioned himself for what was about to happen. Sarah saw the horse and rider approaching. She felt a small bit of hope for the first time since Mark had grabbed her. Maybe help was finally coming. Maybe this nightmare would end soon. "Help me," she called out to James. "He won't let go. I don't know him." James heard her clearly. He could see that she was injured and terrified. He could also see that Mark Stevens was becoming more violent and unpredictable. James knew that talking was not going to work. He would have to use other methods to stop this attack. Wellington was now 5 yards away. The horse was focused completely on Mark Stevens. Wellington could see that this man was causing harm to an innocent person. The horse's protective instincts were fully activated. "Last warning," James shouted. "Release her immediately or I will take action." Mark turned to face James and Wellington directly. His face was twisted with anger and his eyes looked crazy. "I said stay away. She belongs with me. I've been watching her for months." That was the moment James realized they were dealing with a stalker who might be mentally ill or on drugs. This man was extremely dangerous. There was no more time for warnings or negotiations. James had to act now to save the young woman. James gave Wellington the final signal. The horse knew exactly what to do. Wellington had practiced this move hundreds of times during training. He could deliver a precise strike that would stop an attacker without killing them. Wellington reared up slightly on his back legs, his front. Hooves came up off the ground. The horse was perfectly balanced and completely in control. This was not a wild, uncontrolled movement. This was a carefully trained police technique. Mark saw the horse's hooves coming toward him, but he was too slow to move away. He was still holding on to Sarah's arm and could not dodge quickly. Wellington's right front hoof struck Mark in the shoulder with exactly the right amount of force. The impact was immediate and effective. Mark let go of Sarah's arm instantly. He stumbled backward and fell onto the street. The hit was hard enough to stop him, but not hard enough to cause permanent damage. Wellington had been trained to use just the right amount of force. Sarah felt her arm come free suddenly. She pulled it close to her body and scooted all the way inside the taxi. Her arm hurt where Mark had been gripping it, but she was finally safe inside the vehicle. Wellington landed back on all 4 feet and stood perfectly still. The horse had done his job perfectly. Mark Stevens was lying on the ground, holding his shoulder and groaning. He was hurt, but not seriously injured. Most importantly, he was no longer a threat to Sarah. James dismounted from Wellington quickly and walked toward Mark. James kept one hand on his radio and watched Mark carefully to make sure he did not try to get up and attack again. The crowd of people on the sidewalk began clapping and cheering. They had all seen what happened, and they knew that the horse and rider had saved the young woman from a dangerous situation. Ahmed, the taxi driver, finally felt safe enough to get out of his car. "Thank you," he called to James. "That man was trying to kidnap my passenger. I called the police, but you got here first." Sarah was shaking inside the taxi, but she was no longer in immediate danger. She looked out at Wellington, who was standing calmly near his rider. The horse looked like a hero to her. She had never been so grateful to see an animal in her entire life. James spoke into his radio to call for backup officers and an ambulance. Mark Stevens was still on the ground, but he was conscious and breathing. James had to make sure he received medical attention, even though he was a criminal. Wellington stayed exactly where James had left him. The horse was alert and ready in case there was more danger. But Wellington could sense that the immediate threat was over. The woman was safe, and the bad man was no longer able to hurt anyone. The whole incident had lasted less than 3 minutes, from start to finish. But in those 3 minutes, a young woman's life had been saved by the quick thinking of a police officer and the brave actions of his horse partner. Mark Stevens lay on the ground holding his shoulder and moaning. He was hurt but still conscious. His face was pale and he looked confused, as if he was just now realizing what he had done. The strike from Wellington's hoof had knocked some sense into him. James Henderson stood over Mark with his hand ready to use his radio if needed. James had been trained to watch criminals carefully even after they were down. Sometimes people who seemed hurt would suddenly jump up and try to attack again. "Stay down," James told Mark in a firm voice. "Do not try to get up. Police officers are on their way." Mark looked up at James with scared eyes. The anger was gone from his face now. He seemed to understand that he was in serious trouble. "My shoulder," he whispered. "I think it's broken." "Medical help is coming," James replied. He did not feel sorry for Mark, but it was his duty to make sure all people received proper medical care, even criminals. Sarah was still sitting in the taxi, but she felt much safer now. Her arm had red marks where Mark had grabbed her, but nothing seemed to be broken. She was shaking from fear and shock, but she was alive and free. Ahmed, the taxi driver, walked around to Sarah's side of the car. "Are you okay, miss?" he asked gently. "Do you need to go to the hospital?" Sarah looked at her arm and moved it carefully. It hurt, but she could move all her fingers and bend her elbow. "I think I'm okay," she said. "Just scared." "That was very frightening," Ahmed agreed. "But you're safe now. The guard and his horse saved you." Sarah looked over at James and Wellington. The horse was standing perfectly still, as if nothing unusual had happened. But Sarah knew that this beautiful animal had just saved her from something terrible. "Thank you," she called out to James. "Thank you so much." James nodded to her. "Just doing my job, miss. Are you injured?" "My arm hurts where he grabbed me, but I think I'll be okay," Sarah replied. The crowd of people who had watched everything was still standing around. Many of them were talking excitedly about what they had just seen. Some were still recording with their phones. Everyone seemed amazed by what the horse had done. "Did you see that?" one tourist said to his wife. "The horse knew exactly what to do. It was like something from a movie." "That poor girl," said the older woman with gray hair who had tried to help earlier. "Thank goodness that guard was here. Who knows what that crazy man would have done to her?" A young man in a business suit was talking to his friend on his phone. "You won't believe what I just saw," he said. "A police horse just stopped a kidnapping. The horse kicked the bad guy and saved this girl." In the distance, Sarah could hear the sound of sirens getting closer. The police officers that Ahmed had called were finally arriving. James had also called for backup, so there would be several officers at the scene soon. James walked over to the crowd of people who had witnessed everything. "I need to ask some of you to stay and give statements to the police," he said. "What you saw will be important evidence in court." Several people nodded and said they would be happy to help. The older woman stepped forward first. "I saw the whole thing," she said. "That man grabbed that poor girl and wouldn't let go. He seemed drunk or on drugs. Very dangerous." The young man in the business suit also volunteered to be a witness. "I got some of it on video," he said, showing James his phone. "I started recording when I heard the girl screaming for help." Ahmed had also been recording with a small camera that was mounted in his taxi. All taxi drivers in London were required to have cameras for safety reasons. "I have the whole thing on my taxi camera," he told James. "You can see everything that happened." James nodded. This was good news. With multiple witnesses and video evidence, it would be easy to prove that Mark Stevens had committed a crime. There would be no question about what had really happened. 2 police cars arrived at the scene with their lights flashing. 4 officers got out and walked quickly toward James. One of them was Sergeant Williams, who knew James well. They had worked together on several cases before. "What do we have here, Henderson?" Sergeant Williams asked. James gave him a quick summary of what had happened. Male suspect attempted to forcibly remove a female victim from a taxi. Suspect refused multiple commands to release the victim. Wellington was forced to intervene with minimal force to stop the assault. Sergeant Williams looked down at Mark, who was still lying on the ground. "Is he seriously hurt?" "Possible shoulder injury," James replied. "Ambulance is on the way. He's been conscious and responsive the whole time." 2 of the police officers knelt down next to Mark. One of them was a trained first aid responder. He carefully examined Mark's shoulder without moving him too much. "Looks like it might be dislocated rather than broken," the officer said. "Painful, but not life-threatening. We'll let the paramedics make the final call. The ambulance arrived just a few minutes later. 2 paramedics got out and quickly took over Mark's medical care. They put a neck brace on him as a safety precaution and carefully lifted him onto a stretcher. "Will he be okay?" James asked one of the paramedics. "Should be fine," the paramedic replied. "Shoulder injury, possibly dislocated. Some bruising. Nothing that won't heal. Your horse has good aim." While the paramedics worked on Mark, the police officers began taking statements from all the witnesses. Sergeant Williams talked to Sarah first, since she was the victim. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" he asked her gently. Sarah explained everything from the beginning. She told him about finishing work, calling the taxi, and waiting on the sidewalk. She described how Mark had approached her and grabbed her arm. She explained how frightened she had been and how the guard and his horse had saved her. "Had you ever seen this man before?" Sergeant Williams asked. "Never," Sarah said firmly. "I have no idea who he is or why he was following me. He said he had been planning this for weeks, which is really scary." Sergeant Williams wrote down everything Sarah told him. He also took photos of the red marks on her arm where Mark had grabbed her. These would be important evidence. The other officers talked to Ahmed, the older woman, the young man with the video, and several other witnesses. Everyone told the same story. Mark had attacked Sarah and the horse had stopped him. James gave his official statement last. He explained how he had noticed the situation developing and had tried to resolve it peacefully first. He described giving Mark multiple warnings before Wellington had to use force. "Was the amount of force appropriate?" Sergeant Williams asked. "Absolutely," James replied. "Wellington used the minimum force necessary to stop the threat. The suspect was not seriously injured but was effectively neutralized." Sergeant Williams looked over at Wellington, who was still standing calmly nearby. "Good horse," he said with a smile. "Remind me to bring him some carrots next time I see him." The paramedics loaded Mark onto the ambulance. One police officer went with them to the hospital to make sure Mark did not try to escape. Mark would be treated for his injuries and then arrested formally. "What charges will he face?" Sarah asked Sergeant Williams. "Assault, attempted kidnapping, resisting arrest, and probably stalking based on what he said about planning this," the sergeant replied. "He's going to prison for a long time." Sarah felt relieved to hear this. She had been worried that Mark might get a light punishment and come after her again. But with all the witnesses and video evidence, it seemed like he would be locked up for many years. Ahmed offered to drive Sarah home for free, but she decided to go to the police station, first to finish giving her statement. She also wanted to call her mother and let her know what had happened. As the crowd began to break up and the police cars prepared to leave, Sarah walked over to James and Wellington one more time. "I don't know how to thank you enough," she said. "You and your horse saved my life." James smiled at her. "Wellington deserves most of the credit," he said, patting the horse's neck. "He's the one who stopped the threat." Sarah reached out carefully and touched Wellington's nose. The horse was gentle and calm. It was hard to believe that this peaceful animal had just fought off a dangerous criminal. "Thank you, Wellington," she whispered to the horse. "You're a hero." 3 days after the incident, Sarah woke up in her small apartment and looked at her arm. The red marks where Mark Stevens had grabbed her were turning yellow and purple. They still hurt when she touched them, but they were healing. The physical pain would go away soon, but Sarah knew it would take longer for her to stop feeling scared. She had not gone to work at the coffee shop since the attack. Her boss, Mr. Peterson, had told her to take as much time as she needed. "Your safety is more important than serving coffee," he had said kindly. "Come back when you feel ready." Sarah's mother had driven down from Manchester the day after the incident. She stayed for 2 nights to make sure Sarah was okay. "I'm so proud of you for being brave," her mother had said, "and I'm grateful to that guard and his horse for protecting you." Sarah picked up her phone and looked at the news articles that her friends had been sending her. The story had been covered by several London newspapers and even some national news websites. The headlines all said similar things. Hero horse saves woman from attacker, and Palace guards horse stops kidnapping attempt. One article included a photo of James Henderson in Wellington taken the day after the incident. James was standing next to his horse in full uniform, looking very professional. Wellington looked calm and noble. Sarah smiled when she saw the photo. These were the two heroes who had saved her life. Sarah had decided that she wanted to do something special to thank James and Wellington. Yesterday, she had gone to a stationery store and bought some nice paper and envelopes. She was going to write a formal thank you letter to send to the Royal Guard headquarters. She sat down at her small kitchen table with a pen and began to write. Dear Trooper Henderson in Wellington, my name is Sarah Mitchell. I am the young woman you helped 3 days ago when a man attacked me near my work. I wanted to write to thank you both for saving me from a very dangerous situation. I keep thinking about what might have happened if you had not been there. The man who grabbed me seemed very disturbed and angry. I was trapped and could not get away from him. None of the other people on the street were able to help me. You and Wellington were my only hope. I have never seen anything as brave as what Wellington did. When you gave him the signal, he knew exactly what to do. The way he stopped the attacker was perfect. He used just enough force to protect me, but did not hurt the man more than necessary. I also want to thank you, Trooper Henderson, for making the quick decision to help me. You could have waited for other police officers to arrive, but you knew that I needed help immediately. Your training and courage made all the difference. I hope Wellington got extra treats after that day. He deserves them. Please give him a pat from me and tell him that I think he is the best horse in the world. I will never forget what you both did for me. You gave me my life back and made me feel safe again. With all my gratitude, Sarah Mitchell. Sarah read the letter twice to make sure it said everything she wanted to say. Then she carefully wrote the address of the Royal Guard headquarters on an envelope and put the letter inside. Later that morning, Sarah walked to the post office to mail her letter. As she walked down the street, she noticed that she felt nervous being outside alone. Every time she saw a man walking toward her, she felt scared for a moment. She knew this was normal after what had happened to her, but she hoped the feeling would go away soon. At the post office, Sarah handed her letter to the clerk. This is going to some very special people, she told the clerk with a smile. Meanwhile, across the city at the Royal Guard headquarters, James Henderson was filling out paperwork about the incident. His commanding officer, Captain Morrison, had called him into his office that morning. Henderson, I've been reading the reports about what happened on Tuesday evening, Captain Morrison said. I also saw the news coverage. You and Wellington handled that situation perfectly. Thank you, sir, James replied. Wellington deserves most of the credit. He responded exactly as he was trained to do. Captain Morrison nodded. That's what I want to talk to you about. This incident has brought a lot of positive attention to our mounted patrol program. Some people in the government have been saying that horses are old-fashioned and not needed for modern police work. But what happened on Tuesday proves how valuable our horses really are. James felt proud to hear this. He had always believed that mounted patrols were important, but sometimes other people did not understand their value. The newspapers have been calling Wellington a hero, Captain Morrison continued. And they're right. But you made the decision to intervene and you gave Wellington the commands. You're both heroes. Captain Morrison pulled out a file folder. I'm recommending you and Wellington for a commendation. This will go in your permanent record and it might help with future promotions. James felt honored, but also a little embarrassed by all the attention. I was just doing my job, sir. Any of our mounted officers would have done the same thing. Maybe, Captain Morrison said. But you're the one who was there when that young woman needed help. And you made the right decisions, under pressure. 2 weeks later, James received Sarah's thank you letter in the mail at the headquarters. He read it several times and felt touched by her kind words. That afternoon, he took the letter with him when he went to the stables to take care of Wellington. Look what we got, boy, James said to Wellington, showing him the letter. The young woman we helped wrote to thank us. Wellington was munching on hay in his stall. The horse looked up when James spoke to him. James always talked to Wellington like he could understand every word, and sometimes it seemed like he really could. She says you're the best horse in the world, James continued, and she's right. You did something amazing that day. James pulled a carrot from his pocket and gave it to Wellington. The horse crunched it happily. James had been giving Wellington extra treats every day since the incident. Over the next few weeks, the story continued to get attention. A television news program did a feature story about police horses and interviewed James and several other mounted officers. They also filmed Wellington in action during training exercises. The reporter asked James why he thought the story had become so popular with the public. I think people like to see good winning over evil, James said. And there's something special about the bond between a police officer and his horse. Wellington and I work as a team. We trust each other completely. That's what made it possible for us to help that young woman. The TV story also interviewed several members of the public who supported the mounted patrol program. An older man said, "These horses and their riders make the streets safer for everyone. They can go places that police cars can't go, and they can respond quickly to emergencies." A mother with 2 young children added, "My kids love seeing the police horses when we visit London. It makes them feel safe, and it teaches them that police officers are there to help people." The positive publicity had an unexpected benefit for the entire mounted patrol program. The city government, which had been considering cutting funding for police horses, decided to increase the budget instead. They ordered new equipment and approved the training of additional horse and rider teams. Captain Morrison called James into his office again with good news. "Henderson, the success of your response to that incident has helped secure funding for our unit for the next 5 years. The politicians finally understand how valuable our horses are." James was thrilled. He had been worried that budget cuts might force him to transfer to a different type of police work. Now he knew that he and Wellington could continue working together for many years to come. 1 month after the incident, Sarah returned to work at the Royal Brew coffee shop. She still felt nervous sometimes, but she was determined not to let fear control her life. She had also started taking a self-defense class to help her feel more confident. On her first day back, Sarah looked out the window and saw James and Wellington patrolling the street. She felt a warm feeling of safety and gratitude. She knew that these 2 heroes were watching over the area and keeping everyone safe. Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee and walked outside during her break. She approached James and Wellington slowly, not wanting to startle the horse. "Trooper Henderson," she called out. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I wrote you a letter a few weeks ago." James smiled when he recognized her. "Sarah, it's good to see you. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," Sarah replied. "I wanted to thank you again in person, and I brought something for Wellington." Sarah pulled a shiny red apple from her pocket. "I asked my boss if it was okay to give treats to police horses. He said apples are good for them." James nodded. "Wellington loves apples. You can give it to him yourself if you want." Sarah held out the apple and Wellington gently took it from her hand with his lips. The horse crunched it loudly and seemed to enjoy it very much. "He remembers you," James said. "Horses never forget people who are kind to them." Sarah patted Wellington's neck softly. "And I'll never forget him," she said. "He's my hero." As Sarah walked back to the coffee shop, she felt grateful for the brave horse and rider who had saved her life. She also felt proud that she had found the courage to return to work and not let fear win. The incident had changed Sarah's life in some ways, but it had also shown her how much good there was in the world.